Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to wait just a couple more minutes and let others join, then we'll begin today's discussion. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of Postsecondary Pathways. My name is Madeline Smith, and I'm the Director of Higher Education here at the Hunt Institute. For those unfamiliar with the Hunt Institute, we were founded by four-term North Carolina Governor Jim Hunt and serve as a resource for policymakers on education issues across the education spectrum through in-person and virtual convenings, research, and other forms of technical assistance. So before getting the conversation started, I want to provide a brief logistical overview. We'll start with about a 30-minute moderated discussion with our panelists, and then we'll pivot to a Q&A with the audience. If you have any questions throughout the discussion, please feel free to submit them using the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to address them during the discussion. Additionally, we will record this conversation and post it to our YouTube channel for folks to view afterwards. For those attending today's discussion, we also encourage you to share the conversation on social media using #PostPathways. So today is the second installment of a three-part webinar series in partnership with the Belk Center for Community College Leadership, a nonprofit organization at North Carolina State University, which aims to create and distill knowledge into actionable insights, convene people and organizations together to form actionable partnerships, and serve as a catalyst in equipping community college leaders to tackle pressing issues in North Carolina. The first webinar in the series focused on the role of community colleges in post-secondary attainment. If you did miss that one, my colleague will drop the recording for you into the chat. So thank you again for joining today's conversation. It is titled Engines for Equity, the Role of Community Colleges in Access to Higher Education. And this will continue this critical conversation. So I am thrilled to introduce our moderator for this session, MC Belk Tylan, the president and board chair of the John M. Belk Endowment. So the endowment was founded in 1995, initially funding a scholarship program at Davidson College, which was John Belk's alma mater. Under MC's leadership, the endowment redefined its mission in 2012 to focus on post-secondary education in the state of North Carolina. So today, the endowment's goal is to create pathways for underrepresented students to achieve credentials and degrees that are in alignment with the current needs of employers and result in stronger communities throughout the state and additional job opportunities for all people. So thank you again, MC and the John M. Belk Endowment, for your continued support for both the Hunt Institute and the Belk Center. Without your partnership, so much of our work wouldn't be possible. And with that, I will turn it over to you, MC.
Thank you so much, Madeline. And thank you all for joining us today. I know everyone has jam-packed schedules, and I just want to give a big shout out to my North Carolina Community College folks. It's great to see you in the Hollywood Zoom Square. So looking forward to this discussion. As Madeline mentioned, my name is MC Pylon, and I'm excited to be moderating today's panel on a topic that is very near and dear to our team's heart. The John M. Belk Endowment's mission is to transform post-secondary education to meet North Carolina's evolving workforce needs. Our work focuses on access, completion, and workforce development, with a focus on closing the gaps in North Carolina's post-secondary attainment. We know that, as is true in many states, that Black, Indigenous, Hispanic, and low-income North Carolinians are attaining at lower rates than their peers. With equity as a guiding principle, the John M. Belk Endowment has worked energetically in North Carolina to ensure that these students have adequate support and access to resource successfully and attain a degree or credential. Our state has set an ambitious goal of educating an attainment goal to help 2 million North Carolinians ages 25 to 44 earn a high quality post-secondary degree or credential by 2030. It's not enough to continue enrolling students at our current rate. We need to be more intentional in ensuring that students enrolled in higher education represent the demographics of our student population. It is vital that we continue to fight to close the equity gaps in attainment across our state. As we think about improving equitable access, we have to shine a light on our community colleges and the critical role that they play across the nation in educating and upskilling our nation's talented young people towards attainment. Through our research at the Belk Endowment, we discovered that the largest market share of talent in our state is being, can be, and will be produced by our state's amazing community college system. Community colleges serve high school students, recent graduates, adult learners, returners, and local business and industry. They create vital pathways for citizens to achieve family-sustaining wages and opportunities for future job growth, development, and sustainability. Equally important is the data that shows that the student demographic has drastically changed over the past decade. Since 2010, enrollment trends have been in the decline, which is exacerbated by the pandemic as higher education worked to deliver an effective curriculum in a distance learning landscape. Age demographics have shifted also. Students aged 18 to 20-year-olds account for just 40% of all college undergraduates, a group historically known as the traditional student. But it's apparent to us that the traditional student demographic has become even smaller as research shows that the enrollment rate of students ages 18 to 20 has been declining at a steady rate. This shifting demographic landscape has catalyzed in North Carolina to be focused more of their attention on the 1.3 million adult learners ages 25 to 44 that would benefit from a post-secondary education certificate or a degree. And a significant proportion of these have some college, but no degree or credential to show for it. We must focus on equitable access for adult learner population to uplift communities, families, and individuals in North Carolina and beyond. While we're still early in this work, the past few years have further illuminated just how uniquely positioned community colleges are to serve large populations of adults who will believe are key to meeting the need for our state in the years to come. I'm joined today by leaders who really understand the importance and the role that community colleges' access to higher education have and how bright their futures are. We are excited to have Iris Palmer, the Deputy Director for Community Colleges from New America. Dr. Pamela Segal, one of our own, is the president of Piedmont Community College located in Roxborough, North Carolina. And last but not least is Dr. William Surratt, is the president at El Paso Community College. So thank you all for joining us. Iris, I'd love to start with you. As we think about who traditionally attends institutions of higher education in comparison to the demographics of college students today, how can institutional leaders and policymakers ensure that students are supported in accessing higher education, and what barriers exist, and what are some of the best practices to eliminate them? So again, those are a lot of questions, but
it's a big question. It's a very broad question, but thank you, MC, for really setting out some of the structure that I can build on around the population that currently attends college. And I'm really excited to be here, particularly in such exalted company. I am very, very excited to be on the same panel as my fellow panelists. But I'm just going to start here with a couple more numbers to sort of contextualize who the people enrolling in higher education currently are. So right now, 34% of undergraduates are first in their family to attend college, 31% are at or above the federal poverty level, 24% of students are raising children while they're studying. And we know that there's just been a really sizable increase in enrollment over time of the Black and Latinx communities as well. And these are all really good things. I just want to emphasize, like, it's amazing how much more diverse our higher education system has become. What we need to do is think about how to change our systems and structures to support these students, because they have different and really complex needs in a lot of cases. And the way we've set up higher education, even at community colleges, can be really unclear and confusing to participants, particularly first generation participants, but anyone who's busy, frankly. And we've set up systems that make people take classes that don't even count towards their degree in subjects they fear to get a credential that they seek. And these are just not things that are set up to help people with success. And I know we can do better. And so I'm going to give a couple examples of things I think could change to really address these concerns and these changes. So I'd like to start out with an example from Dallas College, not too far, I mean, it's not too far from President. And Dallas College has set up a student care network where they have a caring, qualified person who can talk to each student. These people are either licensed clinical social workers or licensed professional counselors, and they are called student care coordinators. And they go and they assess the needs of each student that asks for assistance, and they can then connect them to resources, whether those are health resources or mental health resources or help with connecting to basic care needs. So these are things like resources in the community around childcare or food or housing. And they are there through every step of the process to connect the student to those resources. And programs like this are great, but unfortunately, we don't see enough coordinated care and coordinated basic needs across the country in community colleges. And that's for a lot of reasons, mostly about resources, let's be honest. And so there's actually ways that states can support this, I would say, through state policy. So Oregon and California have both created funding streams that support positions on campus to help people navigate public benefits that they may be eligible for. And those kinds of navigators can also help connect people to other basic needs supports that are around in the community and also on campus. So this just provides clear navigation for students. And that brings me to my next recommendation, which would be to provide clear navigation for students across their entire college experience, right? So students need someone to guide them through enrolling, choosing classes, choosing a major, finding a job. So this idea of navigation from enrollment to completion is something that I think is absolutely getting more and more attention in higher education, and something that I believe community colleges need additional assistance in making a reality. So really that comprehensive proactive case management and advising is just so important. We did a research project where we looked across all the final evaluation reports for the Obama era TACT grant. And we just saw over and over again that having that navigator was one of the most important things helping students complete their programs. And one of the things that people saw the biggest support for in the grant project, the biggest bang for their buck, I would say. So states can help with this too. I'm very deliberately not talking about the federal government here, so just so you know. But in Iowa, they actually have a program that pays for a navigator around particular programs of study that they consider high needs. We worked with a college that found this so valuable that they actually were able to use general funds to provide navigators for programs that weren't provided by the state. It just had that much impact. The last area I'm going to highlight, because I know I'm running out of time, of course, is around academic structures that discourage students from completing. And of course, I'm talking about remedial education here. Unfortunately, in some colleges, almost all students are placed into 1, 2, or 3 levels of remedial education. This is particularly true for math, but it's also really bad in English. And who would want to take 3 semesters of a class that they hate, that doesn't even count towards their degree, and then they have to pass their college level course? It's just 60% of community college students are placed into some kind of remedial math, and of those, only about 33% finish those courses. It doesn't work. So there's a few ways colleges can make this better. One, they can use multiple measures to place people into into remediation, to just make sure they actually need the remediation to begin with, because lots of times people are over-identified. I would say not defaulting to college level math being pre-algebra or algebraically based, if it doesn't make sense in somebody's major, is another way to sort of address some of this. And then the last piece is to do co-requisite remediation, which basically means placing people who test into remediation directly into the college level course and providing support to get that person caught up and to help support them in completing that particular requirement. So those are just some ideas to help the students that we're serving today. And I know none of this is new, but hopefully it can provide some food for thought in the rest of the discussion.
Thank you so much, Iris, for your thought-provoking, data-rich answers that really focus on human solutions-oriented ideas. Dr. Senegal, we think about higher education as a pipeline to the workforce. And so how do community colleges play a vital role in ensuring individuals access pathways that can connect individuals with life-sustaining wages and opportunities?
MC, thank you so much for moderating this panel, for all of the work and support that you give us in North Carolina. I'm president of a rural community college. So we serve 2 counties, both Person and Caswell, we're right outside of Durham. So I wanted to sort of give you that setting. We serve around 6,000 students annually. As Iris was talking about the different measures and the different practices, I was glad that in North Carolina, we can check off a couple of those things, because it's good to know that we've changed our mind about remedial education, because 10 years ago, we were the worst practice, I think, for a lot of those areas. So we still don't quite have it completely right, but we're definitely on a better pathway so that students aren't spinning their wheels. The way I'd like to address this question is really in 3 buckets. And so the question is really around, what do we do in community colleges to make sure that those pathways are clear? And I'd like to think about this answer in sort of 3 different categories. The first way we do this is with our economic mobility strategies that are focused on high labor market outcomes. And for those of you who are on this call that are working at institutions, one of the most important things that we can do as educators is make sure that the programs that we're offering lead to high labor market outcomes. Through the Belk Institute and NC State, we were able to get a customized report that gave us this set of data about the labor market outcomes that were tied to our degrees and certificates and diplomas. And it turned out at our institution that we have a diploma program that has the highest labor market outcomes of any of our offerings, even beyond associate degree in nursing. But when we kept disaggregating that data, what we realized is that students who were in those programs were not particularly diverse. And then we were also able to look at that same data and, for example, look at our early childhood data. And those were some of the worst labor market outcomes for any of our students and any of our completers. And again, when we disaggregated that data, what we learned is that it was overwhelmingly subscribed to by women and by women of color, right? And so we had to make some adjustments. There are 2 things that we had to do. One is that we've been doing some more deliberate outreach to students of color, particularly around these higher skilled areas that lead to great labor market outcomes to increase the diversity of that pipeline. And we're doing that with summer bridge programs that focus on science and technology, but also partnering more closely with our public schools, and also making sure that there are opportunities for students to complete internships. Because what we know is that when students complete an internship, they're far more likely to be offered a full-time employment opportunity if they did not have that in their place. The other thing that we've done around early childhood is we realized that we had to change the way we were advising students, because who hasn't heard of working in a daycare? And so because these are, we serve a lot of first generation students, what we learned is that students didn't know what they didn't know. And so for every student who's indicated an interest in early childhood, we have intrusive advising opportunities with a staff position that we reworked. And what we've learned is that by giving students a little more information about what their labor market outcomes are going to be, that the vast majority of those students chose to do a different track, still doing something with young people. But just by choosing to go into teacher associate, they're changing the trajectory of their lives. So again, making those decisions, but making sure that you're looking at your data so that it's clear what those labor market, we have an obligation. You know, recently we had a group come to us and they asked us to start a culinary arts program. And everybody wants a culinary arts program. But we did our due diligence, we did our homework, and we looked at what the labor market outcomes were going to be for our students within our region. And what we figured out is that they would be making below the standard wage in our area. And so that wasn't a program that we decided to put on our books. Those are the kinds of hard decisions that we've got to make as community college leaders to make sure that our students are on a trajectory for economic mobility towards those high labor market outcomes. The second thing that we can do is we can make sure that educational opportunities are available without creating mountains of student debt for our students. And so one of the things that we do in North Carolina that we're fortunate is to have support for career coaches in our high schools. Those are our advocates. Those are our voices in the high schools. And what we found across the state is by having those career coaches that are connected to our community colleges, that we've been able to increase the number of students that are taking advantage of it, who are first generation. And we are proving to students every day that they are college going material based on their ability to go ahead and enroll in those college classes and be successful. The third thing that we're doing is we're changing the way in which we're advising. And I already alluded to that a little bit earlier, but we are changing our model to a centralized advising system so that we have dedicated professional advisors that are focused on figuring out what our students need, and then making sure that we have a network of academic and non-academic supports that are available to make sure that students are successful overall. So we've got lots of responsibility. There's no one perfect way to go about this. You've got to pay attention to what's going on in your market, make sure you're looking at your data, and then making the appropriate adjustments. And those are just a few examples of how we're meeting those needs.
Thank you so much for sharing the work that you're doing at Piedmont Community College. I heard data, intrusive advising, and high labor market outcomes. Excited about the great work y'all are doing. I want to remind everyone now is a great time to submit your questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We're looking forward to engaging with each one of you. Dr. Sarah Ta at El Paso Community College has been recognized nationally for its success in awarding degrees and credentials to Hispanic students. Can you tell us a little bit about how you develop your strategy, what advice you have for emerging Hispanic serving institutions or institutions just aiming to better serve their Hispanic students?
Sure. What a pleasure to be with you, MC. I can't thank you and the foundation enough for moving forward with this. Truly appreciated Ms. Palmer's comments, and it was one where I was similar to President Senegal, checking those boxes to ensure that we'd implemented much, if not all, of what she discussed. And so I think that that's part of what El Paso Community College has done throughout its history. We were created in 1969. We opened for classes in 1971. And yet our focus on, as many community colleges, we had a focus on access for a significant period of time. That really shifted in the early, right around the year around 2002, 2003, we really began to focus on access with success. And so I'd point to national student success initiatives that fortunately El Paso Community College has been a part of, and we've utilized that to continue to improve our outcomes. And so Achieving the Dream was one that we moved forward with. Completion by Design was one that the college was involved with. Pathways, the American Association of Community College and Pathways is something that we've been involved with consistently as well. And these initiatives we've seen the results. And so I'll share a couple of things. So when we look at time to degree, it should take a student roughly 2 to 3 years to complete an associate's degree. And yet in 2011 and 12, we were taking 5 years for a student to receive an associate's degree. We have now, since 2013, diligently focused on that. We've trimmed that to 3.9 years with the latest data available. So we've cut out 1.1 year in 9 years. Additionally, the number of credits, not including developmental hours. As Ms. Palmer indicated, developmental hours do not count as credits. So in 2013, our students were averaging 102 credit hours to earn an associate's degree. In the last 7 years, we've cut that down to 79 credit hours. Again, not satisfied. We should be as close to 60 as possible. I would be remiss if I didn't indicate that we do have some programs that are more than 60 hours. Nursing is a program that's more than 60 hours. But as close as we can get to 60 hours. So we've cut 23 credit hours in the last 7 years from time to degree. We anticipate that this data will continue to get stronger, and we will continue to move forward with those student success initiatives. What I've told the team is, if it doesn't work, stop doing it. It was well intended, certainly appreciate that, but if it works, institutionalize it. If it doesn't work, then let's research it. If it hasn't worked for a period of time, we need to stop. So we are very much engaged in student success initiatives. I'm pleased to see that at least preliminary information for this fall seems that we have hit the bottom, if you will, with regards to enrollment declines as a result of the pandemic. It seems like we're starting to slowly climb back up. This fall, we're up about 1%. I will take that, when overall we were down about 15%, 10% the first year of the pandemic in the fall of 20, another 5% in the fall of 21, and now we're slowly creeping back up. And I think that that's incredibly important. I will reference something that President Senegal referenced. I certainly agree on starting programs, but I'll give you an indication. So we have a cosmetology program. We have a culinary arts program. What we're trying to do is we're trying to tie certifications, not level 1 certificates, but business administration certifications to these programs, so that students in these don't just go and become a cosmetologist, but they have the ambition to then open their own business and be successful. And quite frankly, if we don't offer some of these programs, childcare, I'm always pained as a father of 2 sons that that society chooses to pay childcare workers at the lowest wage possible when they're taking care of, from my perspective, the most important asset in our communities, our future. And so I'm torn between saying, okay, we're going to stop childcare if I'm going to let the for-profit do childcare, when I know that we offer the same program at about a quarter of the price of the for-profit. So I'm trying to balance these individual programs. I agree with President Senegal. We don't start programs that aren't going to provide a living wage, but those that we have already, and there's still a demand within our community, then we're going to work hard to ensure that they have the tools so that they can move up quickly to earn that living wage and beyond. So those are the kinds of things. As far as enrollment, as far as the Hispanic population, we're very reflective of our community. We are amongst the top institutions, not in Texas, not in the Southwest, but in the nation, in awarding associate degrees to Hispanic students. We want to make sure that we continue to serve our students and serve them well. We want to facilitate transfer. But I'll share with you what we're really seeing, in particular in the pandemic. While I indicated that enrollment has declined, enrollment in our career technical education programs has increased every term of the pandemic, where we are seeing, we've increased those programs by about 30%. And so what we see is that students want to go into programs, but they want to go into a program that's going to provide them a credential to go into a living wage job immediately. And so we're facilitating that.
Thank you. We heard, partnering with student success initiatives, time to degree was really important. And if it doesn't work, stop it. And if it works, scale it. And I just admire you and your leadership and how you serve Hispanic students, and just really thank you for leading the nation on such an important issue at your campus. Before we go into questions and answers, I want to pose a question for all of you to respond to. So workforce development continues to be a focus for policymakers and practitioners across the nation. How can institutions support students in gaining short-term credentials and reskilling programs while planning for future education opportunities to ensure that economic mobility and life-sustaining wages for their students? Dr. Senegal, we'll come to you first.
So I'm looking in the chat, but I'll answer this question. It seems like we've hit a hot button around the early childhood. So it's good that the Hunt Institute is going to have some other sessions around early childhood, and it's certainly important for us to advocate for higher wages. That's of course what we all want. I think you have to look at these programs in your particular regions. President Serrata and I, we serve very different regions, and in my rural community, for example, there's not an audience for culinary. If I were at Central Piedmont Community College in Charlotte, where there's a much larger base and there's an opportunity for mobility, then we'd make different decisions. So we have to sort of remember there's a regional aspect to many of these decisions that we make. The question, MC, that you're asking us to each have a comment about is what are the things that we can do around short-term credentials, reskilling. In North Carolina, we've got just a stunning number of people who have some credentials, but no high quality credential of value. So they've got debt, but they don't yet have a credential that they're able to leverage in the workforce. And so there are a couple things that we can do. One is we can look at the low hanging fruit at our respective institutions and reach out to those students from our own institutions who have left our institution without a credential of value, right? So that's the low hanging fruit. And then the next level for that is working with companies like Inside Track and with the Belk Institute and others to help identify those people that are located within our service territory who meet that criteria as well, and make a deliberate plan to reach out to those adults. And what we've learned is that reaching out to those adults it's a very different process. It's a much higher touch opportunity to get those adults who are working, who have children, who have other obligations, to figure out a way to come back to us. There are two other things that we can do, and then I'll turn the floor over and let my esteemed peers chime in on this. The other big things is that we can embed credentials into our existing programs, and President Serrata talked a little bit about that, and I'll give you a couple examples. So we have an ag program. Well, within that first year of that program, students are earning, they have all the knowledge to go and sit for a statewide pesticide control credential, right? And so that may not sound like a lot, but if you're a farmer, if you're in that world, that's a credential that you would otherwise have to pay someone else to do. And by having that credential yourself, you're better positioning yourself to be able to be economically sustainable. So it's examples like that. Same thing in industrial systems. Can we embed OSHA in your technology programs? Can you embed those Google credentials, the Cisco credentials, the Oracle, the Google, those kinds of credentials? So embedding is something smart that we can do to make sure that students are leaving with those credentials. The other thing is we got to have conversations with our employers and our industry partners to make sure that they are asking for those credentials, that they're giving preference for them, and also that they have their own educational reimbursement system set up so that they will reimburse employees for gaining those credentials as well. A whole lot of our systems are based on earning baccalaureate degrees and baccalaureate degrees for jobs in the workforce for which it's actually not required. And so we need our industry partners to start valuing those credentials in a way. We have partnerships with about 5 different companies in our area that have agreed to give people who come with those short-term credentials a higher starting salary than those who do not. That's the kind of thing that we need to see more and more often. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. That was a really good, meaty answer. And regionality does really matter. Next, I'd like to turn it back to Dr. Serrata.
Thank you so much. So we have an interesting experiment going on in the state of Texas. And so there is a Texas Community College Finance Commission that will have its last meeting next week. Those recommendations will go forward to the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the speaker of the Texas House. And anticipation is that those will be approved during the legislative session. And there is a real focus on exactly this question. There is a transition. So right now, the community colleges in Texas are funded in 3 revenue streams. We have local taxes, we have tuition and fees, and then we have state appropriations. In 1984, 72% of our budget was based on state appropriations. So today, my budget, less than 20%, is based on state appropriations. So what has happened? Well, our tax base has grown. It's not that we've raised taxes. In fact, my board has raised taxes 4 times in the last 17 years. We only do it when we absolutely have to. But students are paying a higher price for tuition, and our tax base has grown. So we've been able to generate revenue from that. But the focus is going to be on exactly the scope of this question. It is going to shift our funding. Right now, about 17% of our funding is based on performance or student success measures. We're looking at outcomes-based funding being well over 90% of our funding if the legislature passes what we're looking at moving forward with. And what you're looking at is credentials of value, transfer, successful transfer, and then dual credit with a purpose, dual credit on a pathway to reach those credentials. So I think that that's incredibly important. And within those, we're looking at academically disadvantaged as well as economically disadvantaged students. So are we serving the students that need us the most and come to us? And so that really will drive, as we know, if your funding mechanisms shift and your outcomes measures shift, then that'll drive the field to work harder with those respective students. We already see that transition, as I indicated earlier, where we have seen technical enrollment go up significantly. And again, we're trying to do exactly what President Senegal was referencing as far as tying certifications. Again, not level 1 certificates, but certifications to these respective programs so that students come out with a credential. And life happens, unfortunately, sometimes. A student has to go out. If they're going to leave, we want them to go out with something that can earn them at least market value. So a market valued credential. And then we're going to continue to try to get them to come back. And the adult learner is difficult. There's almost 4 million Texans that have credits, but no credential. And so that'll continue to be a focus as well of getting those adult learners to come back. If we didn't learn from the pandemic, as we're on a Zoom meeting right now, then shame on us. We can do so many different things. If you had asked President Senegal and I in February of 2020, can you transition all of your classes from face-to-face to online in a 2-week period? All of us would have laughed and say it's impossible. But we had no choice. We had to do it. So we did it. And I've told our team, shame on us if we haven't learned from the pandemic. We have tutoring available from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. because of the pandemic. We're going to continue those programs, continue to be available to ensure that we're getting students into credentials of value, and that we're ensuring that they go into the workforce and that they're productive members of our community.
I love your thoughtful reflection and feedback and actions that you've changed and how you operate that has come out on the other side of COVID. So thank you so much for sharing. Iris, what would be your response to the question?
So much has already been said. And so I'll actually be reiterating and bringing together, I think, a lot of what's already been said. But we actually did a project where we looked at non-degree programs and what a high quality non-degree program looks like. And a non-degree program is not necessarily short. Apprenticeships, for instance, can be 3 to 4 years. And we see the shorter the credential, generally the less benefit or the less wage bump people get. And at the same time, people, particularly women, may tend to make less with non-degree programs than men. And of course, we have lots of discrimination in our labor market, but it is a real problem with non-degree programs and upskilling. So what do we see actually works with upskilling? Well, number one, I think President Senegal said it really nicely, which is look at your data for your area and figure out where there are living wage jobs that can be filled with non-degree programs. And to be perfectly frank with you, in our very broad look across the country, manufacturing was a place where there was a lot of living wage good jobs, some in IT and tech. But as we've already talked about, health, childcare, well, you can't even really get a childcare job without a degree at this point. And so some of these other jobs are much lower compensated. And so what do you do when there is a reason that society needs these jobs? They are not well compensated because there isn't a subsidy structure that we need to actually pay people a living wage in these jobs. And we've seen a couple places where community colleges have been able to either work with employers who are really desperate to improve the job quality for people. I would point people to my blog on Monroe Community College and how they actually improved job quality for certified nursing assistants. And so they didn't want to create a program. They worked with their long-term care employers in the area to actually improve the quality of the jobs with a little bit higher starting wage, control over their schedules, better benefits, and also a pathway to an LPN, a licensed practical nurse, which is a much better job and generally takes about a year, 10 months to a year, and is really hard for people in these positions to actually get in a lot of cases. So they're creating a program that actually works for their cohorts of students to access. So that's one way to actually work with employers to improve the job quality as much as you can. We've seen colleges that have worked with associations to show employers what the prevailing wage is and how they should increase their wages. We've seen community colleges that have worked with mayor's offices, local government, state government work around high road training partnerships and things like that to increase the quality of the jobs that these programs lead to. And then the last piece I'll just say is there's mixed evidence around training actually increasing wages in the federal investment. So if we look at OEO, Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act, Perkins, some of these others, there's mixed evidence. So what I would say is where we see strong evidence of labor market outcomes for this type of training is in programs that are very, very, very closely aligned with employers and generally sector partnerships and that type of work. So as the more you can get employers involved, the more they have to do things like give an interview guarantee at the end of the program, provide either adjunct staff to the program, provide technology to the program, have that really close relationship, the better the outcomes are for students. And so I think that's the last thing I would recommend is that's so much easier to say than do. I totally get that. But like the closer those relationships can be in upskilling, the better off the students will be when they graduate with these certificates, certifications, boot camps, any of the things, apprenticeships. Obviously, apprenticeship is inherently very connected to the employer, and that's partly why it's so successful, I think, and so hard to administer. So I'll just leave it there. I could obviously go on for hours on this topic.
Well, we appreciate that. Really enjoying y'all's answers and listening to your thoughtful replies. We're now ready for our first question from the Q&A. So the Hunt Institute, the Belk Center, and the John and Belk Endowment are organizations that advocate for progress on the state's post-secondary attainment goal, 2 million by 2030. How can these organizations, along with institutions, optimize their collective efforts for the benefits of students and adult learners?
President Senegal, at least you're in North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, they're already doing this. I mean, they're providing some rich data for us. They are creating a goal for us to work collectively. We realize that we can't move the number forward. They actually have a really helpful dashboard on the My Future NC site that's by county. And what we realize is that we can't move those leading indicators, things like what's your FAFSA completion rate in your community. It's not something that we can do alone, right? And so as a result, and it's not really as a result, these were things that we were doing anyway, but it's putting a spotlight on these things in a way that that it did not exist before. And so I think that's been extremely useful, but it's also inspired us to get creative in terms of working with our public school partners. The new big player on the sort of on the scene now is also working with our homeschool population. And this is, it looks to me like this is something that's come out of COVID. It looks like this is a trend across our state and across our nation, but also making sure that we're reaching out to that homeschool population to make sure that they're also in the queue and that we're considering what their educational needs are as well.
And Dr. Senegal, I'll just kind of double click on you since I'm from North Carolina as well. I think, you know, we're all stronger together than we are apart. And so being able to be aligned and coordinated to an ambitious goal, knowing that everyone has a role individually and collectively, I think is really, really important and just reminds us whether we're in a crisis or we're not in a crisis, we're just doing the day-to-day grind, that we are stronger together. And so how and what we can learn from each other really benefits and puts the student first. So question number 2, this might be a little bit more broad question, but what advice do you have for community colleges that are working towards creating space on campus for increasing a sense of belonging? I'll just throw that out to all 3 panelists and let y'all.
Sure, I'll begin. I think it's incredibly important for students, in particular, when we talk about students of color, first generation students that haven't been on campus before, that we created an inviting and a welcoming environment for them. And I think that that's incredibly important. And whether it's through student organizations and student clubs, athletics, anything that is going to make students feel comfortable and quite frankly, you know, we know that most of our students, as Ms. Palmer indicated at the beginning of this webinar, that there's so many students that are working, and they're not working because they want to work, they're working because they have to work. And so if we can get students employed on campus in meaningful jobs that are part of their curriculum, I think it's incredibly important for us to continue to do that, to partner with business and industry within our respective areas, to have them. Internships, I'm a big believer in, but our students can't afford unpaid internships. they need to be in paid internships. And so this is something that's incredibly important. We'll continue to move forward in that fashion. I'll touch briefly on the workforce and how important that is. So one of the things that we've seen and we've implemented is PTECs, which are Pathways in Technology Early College High Schools. And so these have an employer at the table as soon as we bring them forward. That doesn't guarantee a student a job, but it guarantees that they're developing and helping us develop this curriculum so that these students are ready to go into the workforce. And we do have commitments that they'll at least interview these students and what have you. Our PTEC programs have exploded. We have partnerships, whether they're in healthcare, whether they're in automotive and industry, whether they're in government. And we actually have done PTECs in teaching as well. As we all know, there's a significant teacher shortage. The PTECs are supposed to be level 1 certificates in Associate of Applied Sciences, but we got permission from the state organization, from TEA, Texas Education Agency, to have PTECs focused on teaching as well, so that these students will finish their associate's degrees, go straight to our sister university and earn their teaching degree so that we can continue to have that pipeline of teachers that our districts desperately need.
Thank you for that great answer.
I will just add, have you thought about creating a bachelor's degree program in teaching, since you're allowed to do that now in Texas? Not to bring that up in North Carolina, where I know it's a sore subject. But, just
Not from our perspective, it's not, just saying.
Anyway, we've done a lot of research on community college baccalaureates, and Texas is one place we're looking at really closely around that, because that sense of belonging that students do get when they come to community colleges is something that many of them would like to pursue on to a bachelor's degree. We actually have done research where we found that these many students who come to community colleges and are successful academically for the first time do not want to transfer. They want to finish their education at the institution that they were in and get that bachelor's degree. So anyway, that's a little bit of an aside, but I just wanted to point it out.
Well, and Iris, I'll mention, that's exactly what we find in our area. So we've got an associate degree nursing. And so we know that our nursing students are going to get paid more. They're going to have higher labor market outcomes if they'll go ahead and continue their education and get that bachelor's of nursing. And so we partnered with UNC Greensboro to actually allow students who are in our ADN program to pretty much one semester after they finish, the cohort will start with UNCG. And so many of our students have immediately gone on to get their bachelor's. And so it's not something that we're conferring ourselves, but by strategic partnering, we're making that available to members of our community.
Hugely important. Just great job. The only other thing I'll add is on the internship piece. We've done an entire research project on paid work-based learning opportunities at community colleges and making those more broad-based and creating support for those. Alamo was one of the colleges we actually profiled in that work. And I think that there's a lot of work that has to be done with employers to understand the sort of cultural origin of some of the students that they end up bringing into internship programs around this. So Bunker Hill Community College is a good example of a place where they've actually had to work with employers around, like, here are the students that are going to be in your internships. These are not students from Harvard. These are students from Bunker Hill Community College. They have a different cultural background. And so working with the employers to understand that cultural and have some cultural competency around these types of students can be something that can also, I think, add a lot of belonging, as President Serrata said. The only other thing I wanted to add is I think that having staff and faculty that reflect the demographics of the people that you're trying to serve is incredibly important in creating belonging. We hear from a lot of our colleges that one of the things that they were trying to increase their Latino representation on campus, they were not enrolling, even though it was the neighborhood was around them, really close, totally in their service area, they weren't enrolling those students. And one of the things they found when they went and talked to the people in the neighborhood and in the community was that they weren't seeing themselves on campus. And so ensuring students can see themselves on campus is really important. And that also goes for adult students, because if they don't see a place for themselves, it's really scary to come back to college and just see a bunch of 18-year-olds, and you don't see yourself as like someone who should be there and you don't fit in. So that's a couple things I'd just add, but.
Those are all really great points, and I love y'all feeding off of each other in this great question. So question number 3, How are campuses becoming more flexible for working adults? For example, ensuring that classes are offered outside of working hours to be able to attend classes, or addressing transportation or childcare needs, or many of the other issues that come up for adult learners.
So one of the things that we're doing is we're shifting the length of our courses away from 16 weeks and moving more to 8-week classes, because when we started going back and looking at our data, we saw that students were dropping out of these classes around the 12, 13, 14 week, and they're leaving with nothing, right? And so the thinking is that by shortening the length of those classes, that students are going to be more likely to stay focused and to finish. And even if life happens, being able to hold it together for 8 weeks versus 16 weeks is something really important. And so that's something that we've been really pushing ourselves to make sure that we're offering, because we think that makes us a little easier to do business with adults. The other thing is making sure that we have evening and weekend hours. And so we've arranged and made staff available so that they're here to answer questions from prospective students in the evenings and on weekends when adults have availability. That's hugely important. And some of the other things are, so some specific programs, for example, we've started another cohort of our nursing program that's actually offered on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right? Because the audience for that particular program are people that are already working full-time, that are ideally in the health industry. And so they can configure their schedule so that they can make themselves available on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday versus a Monday through Thursday schedule that's more typical for a full-time enrolled student. So making those adjustments based on the audience, based on the target, creating spaces. We're in the process of updating our campus master plan. And one of the things on there is to create a lounge, a space that's specifically for our adult students, so that, you know, what Iris mentioned earlier about students looking around and not seeing themselves, where they can look around and they can find each other. And that'll be a safe space for them to congregate before and after classes. So little things like that are certainly helpful.
No, I certainly agree with President Senegal. Those are similar things. Again, if we didn't learn from the pandemic, shame on us. So the multitude of hours that we have, whether online or physically and face-to-face for students, is important. And then Ms. Palmer's points are incredibly important as well. So just over 72% of our faculty are faculty of color at El Paso Community College. Didn't happen overnight, but over time, we've been able to have that so that students do feel comfortable on our 5 campuses throughout the region. They see faculty that look like them, they're motivated, and they know it can be done. And so I think that's incredibly important as well.
So I would just add a couple of things. And one is that the childcare nut is a really hard thing. And we actually have a whole proposal on a project for this, because we are in this situation where campus childcare centers are closing at community colleges across the country. They're undersubscribed in a lot of places. They're not being used by the people who need them. And at the same time, we don't have enough childcare for people who need to come to class. And so the question then becomes, why? What is going on with this? And so I was like, why can't we have like a gym drop-in care in a community college where you can just drop your kid for 2 hours? You don't have to like subscribe to the whole thing. Turns out that's really hard to administer. We're digging deeper. We're trying to figure it out. But like, those are some things that I think need a little bit of fresh thinking and a little bit more exploration around making things more flexible and supportive of adults. And another thing that we just haven't solved is the issues with housing. I would say in some of our, well, actually on our rural and our urban campuses, we're really seeing huge problems with housing insecurity for students. And so how do you address that in a way that is within a budget of a community college and doesn't create a residential campus, which none of us really want, it's a really tough question and something that we also think needs a lot more exploration.
I love these ideas. And so what we're seeing in North Carolina, especially in our area right now, housing is a challenge for my employees, right? I mean, there's a high number of our employees who are having to live elsewhere because there's not middle-class housing. And so you can only imagine what a burden that creates for our students. So I'm encouraged by examples that I'm seeing for partnership for housing that we're seeing at Wake Tech and at Durham Tech, where they're not taking on that business for themselves because it's not an area of expertise that we have, but they're partnering and they're doing some making land available. So those are the kinds of assets that we can potentially leverage with partnerships, but partnerships and paying attention to what those needs are. Whatever solution you all come up with for the drop-in daycare, I need to read that report. I've made a note here to check with Iris Palmer afterwards to find out the solution, because we're one of two. We're one of two 5-star daycares, and we continue to operate it. But we've had to supplement it. We've had to do all sorts of things to ensure its longevity, and so it's just such a challenge. So we look forward to tackling that with some fresh thinking with you.
I think these are some really good ideas about being intentional of how you serve adults. And there's some really tough, meaty ones that, again, we need all of us to come together and put our brains around. So thank you for responding. So I believe we have time for one more question, maybe two. But question number 4, President Senegal shared the idea of putting career counselors in high schools. What are some of the other innovative ideas that you are using to better educate students about the variety of options available at community colleges? And how can we think about how we market, if you will, to high schoolers all the amazing pathways that a community college has?
I wish I could take credit for the career coach thing that's happening across North Carolina community colleges, but it's something that's actually embedded in our state budget. And so schools have access to those funds. And so because legislators saw that there was such a benefit for that, they've increased funding for that. And so that's a benefit of being in North Carolina. But the other thing is we have to start earlier. We have to start sooner. And so we're having an internal conversation right now about what is the role of summer programs. How can we make those summer programs available at no cost, but also provide transportation and food so that the audience that we are attempting to encourage to consider different career paths, that they'll be able to take advantage of those kinds of things. And so we're meeting with our public school partners to figure out what's a referral network. If any of them are on this session, I'm also going to be hitting them up for transportation and food costs, and we'll provide the instruction and the location for them. But I think those are the kinds of investments that we've got to do. We've got to start earlier. We've got a breakthrough learning in agriculture and science technology, a BLAST program that we're running in some of our toughest hit elementary schools in one of our counties. And we're literally getting K-5 students excited about careers in agriculture. And they don't even realize that they're also they're also improving their reading and their science and their math skills along the way. But we're having to start much earlier, having these conversations about what are the opportunities that might exist for you beyond what they might recognize within their own small circles.
So I'll dovetail off what President Senegal indicated. So we have adopted 10 elementary schools in 10 different school districts in the greater El Paso area. I was an enrollment manager for a long time before I served in this capacity, and we wait to recruit students until they're seniors in high school, and children as young as 2nd and 3rd grade are deciding if they're going to go to college. And so we have to embed that expectation within them at that early age. I think with regards to the technical fields, we have to change the mindset, and we also have to get leaders to indicate what these are. So I hear a lot, we don't need philosophers, we need welders. So not everyone has to go to college. Well, you have to go to college to be a welder. And I think that that's incredibly important too. We have to change the conversation so people realize what is college. And then, automotive technicians in today's world, we always think of, the dirt under the nails, et cetera. They don't even touch the vehicle until the computer tells them what's wrong with the vehicle at this point in time. They're incredibly sophisticated programs. The level of the reading levels, the math levels in many of these programs are much more advanced than people anticipate. And so I think it's really important that we give credence to all of the respective programs that we produce, and we start sharing with the community more and more the earnings of these particular individuals that go into these programs. They're high wage, high skilled programs. And I think that that's incredibly important as well.
I would love to piggyback on that and just point out that this gets back to our workforce training conversation. But a lot of these occupations where there are really high skills and really high wages have incredible occupational segregation. So they generally are male, they tend to be more white, and they're also they're like the manufacturing jobs, the automotive jobs, the jobs that with the IT, like all of those tend to be more male and tend to be more white, at least at the higher levels in IT. There's some gray areas there, but the point is, and then the care jobs tend to employ more women of color. And so how do you communicate, not that the care jobs aren't important, they obviously are very important to our society and we need to fix the subsidy problem, but like, how do you communicate that there are these other jobs, these other paths, that these are not workplaces that will be hostile to you because of who you are and what you look like? And how do you ensure that's true? First of all, second of all, how do you like communicate that to the community, that there are these opportunities? I think it's a really good question. It's something we've explored a little bit in our research, but there's so much more to do here because I think getting across the idea that actually a manufacturing job is incredibly advanced, takes a lot of work, and is like very much not dirty and like isn't about oil anymore. It's like about programming almost. Like that is a hard shift to get into people's minds, but it's necessary, I think.
Well, this has been an outstanding panel, and I really, really wish we could keep this conversation going. I think as Iris alluded to, you know, we could talk about all these things all day. There's so much great meat here, and I'm glad y'all are focusing your time on community colleges. So thank you so much for being on this panel and engaging, and thank you to the audience for asking so many great questions. We know we didn't get to really make a dent in the list that you gave us, but we will figure out how to respond and get back to you on this. But before closing today's discussion, I just wanted to remind the audience to register for our final session of this partner series. It'll take place on Tuesday, January the 31st at 2 p.m. Eastern and focus on North Carolina's efforts to engage adult learners. We hope you will join us. You can register for these discussions using the link in the chat, and the Hunt Institute team will also be in touch via email and social media in the coming days, weeks regarding registration. Again, thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you again very soon. And Leadership Matters. Have a great day.